Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jaina and Dóchas, for having me today. It's such a privilege, particularly with the weather as it is. I've only been in Ireland once before, and it was in Dunleary in June, and it wasn't like this. I didn't have a jacket, and that was a mistake. But thank you very much for having me. It's such a privilege to be here today and to be able to speak to you. And I've given it a lot of thought. What is it that might be of use for you to spend this next hour discussing? And I've always been accused of being too theoretical, particularly in MSF, where practicality is an ultimate value. But I think it is important for us to look beyond the obvious at particularly a moment like this. Understanding or attempting to at least understand what caused where we are might be a solution in how do we get out of it. So I work since last November in the New Humanitarian. New Humanitarian is a newsroom that has celebrating this year its 30th birthday. And the idea of it came after the genocide in Rwanda, where the missing of the information, the disinterest of the media in covering a crisis that is happening somewhere else has caused the need for an alternative media outlet. That was hosted by OCHA until 2015, and since then it's been an independent NGO. And what we are talking about here is one of the issues of how do you cover a humanitarian context and a humanitarian system in a way that is not just a replication of all the news we're talking. And that gives us an insight, because what we're talking about is not only covering when bombs blow and disappearing when everything is slightly calmer, not appeasing an audience that is disinterested and playing into their disinterest, but having a consistent narrative that actually emerges from journalists and communities in the ground in places affected by humanitarian situations. And I think that over the years and over the coverage and over having the journalists who have this experience, we get a bit of an insight that allows us to potentially see things from a slightly different angle. And what I'll tell you today is, in my plan, is talking about what are we seeing today in the humanitarian developmental sectors, and then argue that what we're seeing today and what is causing us to potentially be fairly nervous is not the problem in itself. It is potentially a distraction from an actual problem. And then I would like to propose at least a way of thinking and potentially acting on this. So, I mean, on my notes, I call this section Humanitarianism and its Discontents, and I'm plagiarizing Freud's famous article. But it came to me that in Geneva, there is an annual meeting called the Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week. And this year, there were a few things that were interesting. It happened after the dismantling of USAID and the beginning of the cuts, when it was still even more messy than now. And people didn't even know whether they will have money to implement their projects or not. And the thing I've heard repeatedly in that week by people empowering the humanitarian sector was, this is a system collapse. It's a system collapse. At the same time, the response to it was running from one place to the other, trying to get new donors. So in that same week, I was invited to a meeting where large organizations were appealing to the private sector. Obviously, if the government sector is going to stop being a donor, then we might as well look where the biggest pot of money next is. And that comes with its own problems, because the private sector is not as easy. And they might sit and have, directors for public engagement and philanthropy and social responsibility. There is a scrutiny beyond that that has happened. In the sector, we have potentially in the past adhered to, let's not take money from pharmaceutical companies. Not everybody does that, but at least from tobacco, oil and gas, and weapons manufacturers. But today we're sitting in meetings where the solution for the cuts in budget is let's sit with the big money corporations. Who are those now? Of the highest value 10 companies in the world, I think the first 6 are technology companies. Those are the ones who are developing AI. And they are sitting in the meetings and they potentially will put some money into this. And in a little bit of time, I don't think it will cover what we're missing, but in a bit of time, we will be asked, why did you take money from companies who are effectively exploitative? Hundreds of thousands of people in the same countries you're working in are working in precarious situations to encode the AI data for nearly no pay, that are polluting. The amount of water and energy required to operate AI is much bigger than our pretense, let's not fly anymore and have Zoom meetings instead. It is more important to consider the carbon footprint of AI, and that are effectively manufacturing weapons, because AI now is being sold as a weaponized entity. The same data centers that are hosting our questions about, which printer to buy and what fashion brand is going to be good and what stocks should I host, also the same databases that are targeting individuals in military operations and so on. We know that, but the panic of wanting money is causing us to brush that aside. So budget cuts, let's put that in context. We have heard in the media about the budget cuts. They are, the whole US foreign aid is about 65 billion US dollars. USAID as an organization only runs about 20 of them, or did. Not all the 65 billion are aid to help people. A lot of it is military aid, and a lot of it is economic aid. The defense budget of the US is $1 trillion, 20 times higher than all the aid they give. The issue is not lack of money, the issue is allocation of money. And this is not exclusive to the US. And the reason I'm saying that is I want it to be clear, there is plenty of money. The issue is not finding money, the issue is allocation of money. Germany has had a constitutional break on deficit since the Second World War. In the name of not having deficit, they have broken in 2011 the economy of Greece effectively and caused a progressive government to fall because they had to follow the austerity imposed by Germany. Suddenly today, it's not important anymore. Merz, who has become effectively 2 days ago, the chancellor officially, has declared that they will eliminate the debt break and put a deficit up to 500 billion euros for armament. That's a lot of money. I mean, in his mind, the Red Army is at the border of Germany. The Greens, as I understand it, I'm not an expert in German politics, but apparently they were doing the Christian Democrats and Social Democrats alliance, and the Greens were a potential partner. They said, okay, fine, do your defense budget. Can we put a little bit of money for environmental causes, for clean water, for stuff? And they said, no, we don't need you. Go, piss off effectively. It's not a matter of money. If you're borrowing 500 billion euros, there is a little bit for environmental causes. It is a very significant message. The same goes for the UK. The Keir Starmer, supposedly, Labour used to be left in the old days. At least the UK Labour used to. And now they want to spend 2.5 billion more on defense. And the statement was, we will cut aid, which was cut just a couple of years ago, by the way. We will cut aid to 0.3% so we can spend on defense. This is a false narrative. The cut in aid is not enough to spend on defense, and they didn't only cut international aid, they cut UK social security as well. That wasn't in the statement because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is appeasing people who want us first. It goes the same for many others. The Netherlands has sent to Parliament the Minister of Aid and Trade, let alone the irony of aid and trade being the same thing, has sent to Parliament saying we will only provide aid that supports our national interest directly. Now, we knew about all of this before, but it wasn't it was something you hide. Now it is something you reveal. So, what is it doing? Does anyone know how many HIV patients get treated by USAID or PEPFAR every year? There are 20 million HIV patients, mostly in Africa, that used to get HIV treatment. I'm not entirely sure from the news whether it was cut immediately in the stop work orders. I want to put it in context. This is just one thing. 45,000 people may have died because of the cut in PEPFAR between January and end of April. 45,000 to 50,000, of them about 5,000 are children. This is not talking about the malaria programs, mother and child programs, and food programs. Atul Gawande, who's a surgeon and a famous author and worked in the USAID until recently, told of, again, it's not about saving money. There has been $500 million, apparently, in food that was already purchased to be distributed. And they said, do not distribute it. It went rotten. It was to be wasted as long as no one benefits from it. The reason I'm saying all this is because we need to get it at least in perspective. It is not about saving money. And the reason I say that is because the response of the humanitarian sector has been, let's find a way to save you money. Let's do efficiency. If you look at the humanitarian reset or the discourse of much of the sector, the response is, okay, we believe you against all evidence. You want to save money. Let's save you money. Let's cut programs. Let's cut staff. Let's cut food rations, as WFP is doing. Let's cut schools and camps and services like UNHCR is doing, as long as we save you money. We've served two narratives here if we do this. One is to say, yes, you're right, we were wasteful, even if the saving actually harms people we're serving. And the second is to pretend that they are right, is to legitimate the discourse of efficiency, which isn't at the heart of it. And here, I'm trying to be clear. It's not either be inefficient or do what they are saying. There is a need for examining the actual ways of working of that, international aid sector, but doing it in a way that serves that narrative, which is increasingly restrictive and exclusionary, makes us potentially complicit in legitimizing it. So I mentioned HIV, malaria, and mother and child care, mentioned hunger, and that is immediate effect. But as Jaina mentioned before, the issue is not only the cuts of the Trump administration. The international aid has been reduced over the past 10 years. And here is the next part. If those are symptoms, if Trump and his administration in their behavior towards international aid are the sore that burst that told us there is a disease under the skin, what is that disease? And I would argue that the disease is that the whole creature, post-World World War II creature of rules-based international order or international liberal international order, however you want to call it, stopped existing effectively. We might still have the facades, but you'll hear different arguments about when or how. I think somewhere in the betrayal of the Arab Spring in 2011, up to the dumping of Palestine and the allowing Russia to effectively eliminate the Syrian opposition between 2014 and 15, to letting Russia occupy. There's an author who wrote a book called the Holocausts We All Deny, calls it the Summer of Hate 2014. That is the time where the idea of a solidarity-based international order has sort of ceased to exist. Now, I'm not defending, just to be clear, I'm not defending liberalism. Liberalism is, I don't know if Nancy Fraser, who's a philosopher and activist in the New School in New York, talks about the difference between the left and right in the US. It's not a left and right. It is conservative neoliberals and progressive neoliberals. All of them want market. All of them want billionaires. All of them want corporation. Some of them want abortion and corporations and neoliberalism. Some of them don't want abortion. And that's the difference. There isn't a left. And in that sense, I'm not defending liberalism because liberalism has been a way of sustaining power to those in power. It has been a way to keep those who have won the colonial war games between 100 and 400 years ago to continue to be powerful. COVID was a very good example. Who got vaccines, who didn't? How did they get it? And who lost on that game? It was an obvious example. But what I'm saying is, for international development, the liberalism, the pretense of benevolence was a necessity. It was a condition of necessity for our sector to exist. In that, I'm arguing that we have been for a very long time in a compromise. The compromise is, you give us space so we can actually do something good. You give us resources so we can save some people's lives. We give you legitimacy of having given us the resources so you can go and do your politics and your wars and your so on. At least we would have done some good because you would have done it anyway. That compromise, and here I'm not being critical, I'm saying it is what it is. Humanitarianism and development saved a lot of lives when it didn't mess up massively like the IMF and structural adjustments and so on. But that compromise held because those who were in power to enforce it benefited from the appearance of being benevolent. They wanted to do politics of benevolence, to say that we are helping the world, we are in solidarity, we are doing soft politics, soft power. My reading, and that isn't just mine, I'm plagiarizing a lot of people here, is they don't care anymore. Soft power is too much work. Trump is an example. And hard power is better because at the same time, you project force, you give a lot of money to your friends in the military-industrial complex and all that, and you guarantee that everybody who's unhappy with whatever you're doing is distracted by the next war you're about to wage. That has always been the case under the surface. Now my argument is, whatever was the pretense that allowed us to exist as a sector, as a solidarity, to float on the surface of the system doesn't exist anymore. So what does that mean? It goes back. It's not about the money. There's so much money. Ludicrous amounts of money. Elon Musk a couple of years ago said, give me a plan to stop world hunger, and I'll give you whatever money you need for it. Actually, I think UNICEF or WFP gave him a plan for $6 billion. Mind you, the guy lost since January to today, lost in stock prices $200 billion. He doesn't care. Money is nothing. And he refused. Like they told him, here's a plan. We will eliminate hunger. And he said, piss off. So it's not a money issue. It's a system issue. And the reason I say that is because our humanitarian response collectively has been, let us find the next donor. First, we freaked out, and changes between those who started cutting their budgets before they needed to those who are still trying to make ends meet. And to us, actually ending up in a way legitimizing the discourse about the inefficiency. It is not the inefficiency of the system only. It is the inefficiency of saving the lives of people who are not needed, are not producers, are apparently only consumers. That shouldn't deserve to live. And this is dangerous. So we went through the, stages of grief, denial, whatever, denial, anger, and so on. And then disillusionment. And we're still arguably unable to look at it, look at our positionality from outside the existing liberal order that demands of us to be a legitimating force for those in power. And there will be a point where there will be no return on our collective investment in appeasing those in power. The problem I fear is that at that point in time, we won't have an alternative. We won't have a discourse to rely on. A while ago, I was talking to a leadership of a big organization, one of the biggest organizations. And they're telling me, what would it take for young people to be excited about us again, to come and volunteer and work and go to the field and so on? And I said, when I was in Syria, when I was a kid, the reason I joined the Red Crescent there as a volunteer was because that was the only place in what was a totalitarian police state to assemble. There was a law actually against more than 3 people assembling together without permission. So being a volunteer allowed me a place where you can actually talk to people and exist with others. But today, we need to think about, if you are a young person who's seeing a world where conflicts are ignored, where a tide of racist, xenophobic political parties that can easily be called fascists are taking power in what used to be the liberal democracies, and will continue to take power unless something happens, where a genocide is enacted live for 17 months, and where we have, 14 million displaced people in Sudan? When was the last time you read about Sudan on the BBC or the Guardian, let alone? And in a world where the contradiction is mind-boggling, I'll finish here. 2 days ago, the Financial Times, like the mouthpiece of neoliberalism, is talking about, it's shameful that Europe is silent about the genocide in Gaza. When the Guardian and the BBC don't dare mention it. And none of those all is interested in Somalia. I was in Somalia last year, one of my last trips with MSF. Again, around, by the way, there are 800,000 people displaced. Water tanks are empty. Not talking about food, not talking about services or schools or any of the luxuries. I'm saying there was no water. When was the last time you've heard anything about Somalia in the news? Or anyone gave a lot of money for Somalia or so on. So what are we faced with is a limit, what I would call a limit situation for the humanitarian sector. We are faced, or the international aid sector, we are faced with a situation that exceeds our ability to cope. at least in the form we are in the form of polite, conference attending, globe-trotting bunch of people who come from privilege. And we're enforcing on ourselves the idea that the legitimacy only exists if it's given by states, because states are our donors. Guess what? They are stopping to be our donors. And we will need to both find causes of legitimacy, not only of our organizations, but of the idea of a humanitarian or development sector that do not emanate from appeasing politicians. I don't know what that is, and it'll be different from place to the other, but what we can't afford is a poverty of imagination. In 1968, one of the most famous graffitis on the walls of Paris in the uprising against the government, against de Gaulle at the time, was l'imagination au pouvoir, power to the imagination. And now our imagination is restricted to the forms and log frames that are required for proposals. And we might want to think, what does it look like? Who are the allies that we need to have on our side? And what is the role that actually tips the scale towards doing more good than causing harm, when the harm we cause might be actually legitimizing or allowing the continuity of things that range from terrifying political prospects in Europe and genocide in the rest of the world. Thank you very much.